now. My name is Aaron Walsh. I'm the director of the Immersive Education Initiative, and I've had the pleasure of working with Jerome and Melissa for several years on a number of Immersive Education Initiative projects and activities. Jerome is the founding chair of the Library Technologies Working Group. His concept for using immersion for library study spaces and library services really started this larger activity that we're now part of, and Jerome will talk about that as we transition into what we call an expanded charter for the group, which gives us the library and the museums group. And Melissa and I have been working together for a number of years with her work in the Smithsonian, and in particular the virtual watershed and the projects that she's involved with. And in fact, Melissa is going to be keynoting Immersive Education 2013 around those topics. So I'll take a back seat and defer to our chairs of the newly expanded group, and I'll start to work some of the slides and turn it over to Jerome and then Melissa to run the show.
Well, thank you, Aaron, and welcome to all of you. The idea for the Library Technology Working Group came in 2008 when I was University Librarian at Boston College, and I realized that pedagogy had changed so much in the previous 15 years that we no longer had sufficient facilities for the students who needed to work together on collaborative projects, joint assignments, and classwork that required group effort. We had about a dozen group study rooms, and we probably needed 30. I was aware of the Education Initiative, and especially of Wonderland, which had some models that were inspiring. And so I approached Aaron and suggested the idea of collaborative library study space. Immersive education groups were already at work to define and develop open standards and platforms and best practices for virtual worlds in education and research. They were also doing work on simulation and game-based learning systems and mixed augmented reality. So it was a natural fit where the idea of a virtual study room would allow individuals, wherever they might be working, or wherever they might be located, to work together in a virtual space with library materials and tools, as well as with productivity tools. So they would have at their disposal search engines, online catalogs, media players, word processors, spreadsheets, graphic design software, and so forth. And this would clearly be a boon not only for real-world institutions lacking sufficient physical space, but also for distance education, for international education, for study abroad programs, where students could be abroad and participate in home campus study assignments. Think also of rural public and school libraries that lack resources or expertise. And so we set an immediate goal of providing a specification and framework for developing products and services for immersive libraries and platform support, and created the Library Technology Working Group, which drafted a charter and enlisted membership from the Second Life community of librarians to work with us. We then went to work on creating a collaborative study space reference model that addressed two questions. How do you move assets in and out of the 3D virtual library easily and conveniently? And how do you work with these assets in a collaborative virtual space? The reference model, I'm happy to say, was launched in December of 2009. It was a set of tools and facilities for moving assets from the traditional online world, the World Wide Web, to the virtual world, in this case, OpenSim. These were tools that give the user a simultaneous perspective on real and virtual worlds, and that make it easy to populate and use 3D virtual world library and teaching spaces with relatively little experience, and that was an important sub-goal, namely that there be a very easy learning curve. And this was the beginning of a permeable boundary between the real world and the virtual world. Kudos go to Rich White for his development of the private and collaborative learning spaces, and for Nick Nagel, to Nick Nagel for his work on the Web-to-World tool and the transcoder that allowed assets to be seen from one virtual world to another, to be moved from one virtual world to another. And work on this model is continuing in other open source platforms. So I think that we inspired further work around this concept. And in a sense, it was the first step towards global scale virtual worlds. It was a landmark demonstration of the protocols and technology for interoperability among virtual worlds. And as such, it was a pioneer effort. There's still challenges ahead. Although the first goal of the Library Technology Working Group was to create individual and group study spaces, immersive libraries also encompass materials, collections, new forms of material, rich learning environments, new service modes, even the management of the library itself in virtual worlds. So there's still a lot to be done for librarians to define and create systems to fully realize information services in virtual environments. For example, enhanced services to users, information literacy programs, immersive research and course consultations, the entire realm of real-world library services was the focus of the Library Technology Working Group. But think about the importance of network delivery of research materials. It's essential for libraries, and you'll hear, of course, you imagine, of course, that I'm migrating towards museum and cultural institutional interests as well, of course. But the network delivery of research materials is essential, but the interface between real and immersive systems is not designed well for document transfer. And in the case of learning spaces, the immersive library needs to be integrated into curriculum management through course delivery and course management software so that course content and virtual assets communicate across the boundaries between real life and virtual environments. And now, with the advent of massive online open courses, there's new opportunity and need for effective after-class student-to-student communication, faculty-student communication, and access to learning and research resources. So we have a nice foundation and some proven work that has inspired continued development, and it's opportune now to bring the interests of libraries and museums together because there's so much in common by way of goals and practices of the two types of research institutions. So I would, at this point, turn the floor over to Melissa to talk some more from the perspective of the library, the virtual museum.
Thank you so much, Jerome. Well, first of all, I just want to give a shout out to everybody. Thank you so much for your interest in joining this working committee as well, or working group, and for joining us today in the launch. Can everybody hear me? You can, right? And I would just like to say that in a conversation that I had last year with Aaron, I was very excited to hear the plans to expand the library working group to include the museum perspective. And I am really, really appreciative to both Aaron and Jerome for the opportunity to do this, as well as to be able to share this with the group. Basically, again, the work that I do at the Smithsonian, I work for the Smithsonian Latino Center. We are one of 9 educational outreach and research units of the institution. I'm really, really interested in co-chairing this working group as a way to be able to share with you some of the best practices that we've been able to develop. In the 13 years that I've been at the institution, I've really, really looked at working on interactive and immersive bilingual online experiences, and I noticed that some of my folks that I've worked with in the past are actually here today, so I thank you for being here and for your participation. The whole process that I've been involved with has really encompassed representing and exploring Latino cultural identity, again, through this lens of new media and technology. So in 2009, in working with Aaron very specifically in areas that address the cultural dimensions of education technology and its impact on youth audiences as well as educators, it became very clear to us that we really needed to pay attention to what was going on in the library sciences. And as Jerome pointed out, what was key for us in terms of how we were representing and interpreting digital collections online, there needed to be an understanding, too, of how that content was being distributed across platforms, as well as how was it being maintained. What were the best practices, if any, around that type of work? And there really hadn't been anything done, of course not, because of these emerging technologies. So it's really exciting to see where we are in this point of time. We do have models that we can reference to, as Jerome pointed out. For the museum, from the museum perspective, promoting this necessity of a 21st century transformative teaching and learning approaches to educational outreach is core to how we represent and interpret the cultural content to the masses. One of the things that I really want to bring to the group, and I know I invited a lot of my Smithsonian colleagues to the table on this as well, is when we talk about digital curation, for example, from the museum perspective, we're talking about library and museums, best practices intertwined, which is what Jerome was also pointing out. Intertwined in the digital capture of the cultural artifact from a museum collection, for example, it really requires us to look at those practices established in the library sciences in order for us to better understand the process of conservation and preservation of a digital artifact and a digital surrogate. You would think that for the Smithsonian Institution, we would have it all together and have all of the answers. Well, we don't, but we've done a lot. And the dialogues are really emerging around this whole digital curation and what does that mean and how is that being defined from a cultural heritage standpoint. So I really do think that, you know, in terms of we need to continue to challenge and redefine our own practices in order to allow us or allow new and better strategies to emerge. And that's really part of the point of this working group. Somebody has an open mic. I'm not sure who has an open mic, if you're aware. Anyway, moving the conversation on a bit. Again, for us, the goal is to engage audiences in relevant and accessible ways. And for the Latino Center, back in 2008, we started prototyping what a Latino virtual museum model would look like in a space such as Second Life. And we launched officially in Second Life in 2009, and it became a wonderful testbed to really start to understand the dynamics of representing cultural heritage in these new emerging spaces, as well as understanding the other important part of it, too, is the digital curation that I mentioned in terms of the creation of a digital surrogate, the maintenance of that digital derivative in these types of spaces. I still remember clearly turning the Smithsonian Office of Contracting upside down when I approached them to look at our content, our digital content, and review the copyright data embedded in these digital files. They had no clue where to even begin, and this was, 3-4 years ago. And working very closely with Aaron and his team and some of his constituencies, as well as my own Smithsonian internal groups, as well as some of my consultants, we really started to have a better understanding of best practices working with proprietary and open source types of technologies. And again, looking at best practice and understanding what are some of the best ways in terms of maintaining metadata and the transfer of cross-platform accessible content. And just very briefly, you'll notice in reading the project charter, one of the case studies that we're sharing with you is a project that was launched under the Latino Virtual Museum, which is called Mi Tierra, Mi Mundo, My Land, My World, which is a collection of bilingual real and virtual watershed resources that we initially started working with Aaron and his folks with back in 2010, I believe. And basically, it's a watershed game. It's an immersive environment in which students can learn about real-world ecological concepts related to sustainability and stewardship. Important here for us, again, looking at how we can embed and motivate strategies for learning in terms of career opportunities in STEM-related fields. So I'm really excited about being able to share some of these resources with the group, as well as listening to the work that you all have been doing. I was very excited to see a lot of the conversation that's been happening in the last week or so on the listserv, just in introductions and understanding where everybody's coming from. So I'm really excited about the energy already invested in this. And with that, I will turn it back over to Jerome.
Thank you, Melissa. At this point, we turn the agenda to Aaron, who wanted to say a few things about the charter.
Hi. All right. Thank you very much, Melissa and Jerome. We're going to go ahead, and if you take a look at the wall behind me and Jerome, we're following through with the same agenda that was circulated to the LAM.TWG list server. Item number 3 is a charter feedback and input. This is actually a post-meeting action item. We have a number of things to do following this launch event. One of them is to review the charter, provide feedback and input. And so what I'm going to do is I will circulate now, as we head into number 4, I will prepare the email and circulate the charter on out to the group so that you have it in your email boxes. I'll also come back in a moment and put it into the text chat so you can take a look at it. What you'll find is that the bulk of the charter is based on the Library and Museums group, and it has been expanded into the new group where there's the museums perspective, and the charter is at what I would consider a final draft stage amongst the chairs, with my participation more as an editor than as a chair, but it's now at a point where it can be reviewed by this group. Additional use cases and additional perspective can be brought back into the charter so that we can revise it and enhance it. But significantly, in the charter, there are a number of objectives and action items that really, I think, the group will break down around in terms of where people want to be involved and the types of things that they want to be participating directly in. The action items for the group basically include the high levels, what we call best practices, for example, or specifications, down to some of the very specific activities of identifying funding and applying for funding. And there's a wide range of areas that you may want to be involved with. And what we might do, depending on how active the email list gets, is we may break into smaller email groups as we start to tackle some of these action items on the charter. In fact, let me just take a quick sort of a straw poll now. If you press the T key and are able to text chat back, there's been a fair amount. I wouldn't say, a huge amount of conversation on the email list, but do you find the level of frequency of emails to be manageable at this point on the group if you were to keep up with that? Or have you found that you needed to go to a digest mode where it was just too much? That's sort of a key question that people who want to participate can often be overwhelmed if they're getting too much email. So if you feel like it's all right, we'll keep it as is for now, and we'll drive everything through that main list. And if it gets too heavy, what we'll likely do is break the conversations down into subgroups where there are teams of folks working on certain items, and then they can report back into the larger group. So as a note, if you do start to get overwhelmed with the amount of email flow on that list, you have the ability to go to the bottom of any one of those emails. You can log in and manage your account, and you can change it to be a digest, which means you'll get all messages for that day just once in a day instead of getting them all individually. So it sounds like so far the traffic's not too difficult. What I will do is I will now go get the charter and circulate it on out by email and also into the group. And this might be a good point as I prepare that to email it out. It'll take me about 2 minutes. If we move on over to item number 4, if there's any questions at this point, I'm sure we've got a nice group of active people here. You might have some open questions for Jerome or Melissa. I'll grab the charter in the meantime and put it in the group if you folks want to sort of open the floor for this period as I get that ready.
Thank you, Aaron. That's a good idea. Does anybody have any questions at this point for us? Or ideas? Things they want to share?
Hi, I'm Jane. I have a question. Can you guys hear me?
Hi, Jane.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. I guess my question is, what skills would be best suited to prepare students to interact and even build these worlds? I'm currently teaching immersive education, and one of my focuses, of course, I kind of in 2 different major areas, but one of the focuses is really, I'm interested in preparing these kids to be the next generation innovators using these technologies. So I don't necessarily, of course I want them to be fluent in the use of virtual worlds and digital game-based learning and all that. However, I'm really interested in preparing our next generation of innovators in this technology. And just kind of wondering from your guys' perspective, what are some of the more prevalent things that I could be teaching my students? Like right now I've been teaching them photogrammetry and spherical photography, and we're combining those in Maya and outputting them to Unity. And I guess I'm looking for other really specific aspects that you guys might suggest that I consider incorporating.
Jane, that's a really, really good question. And I actually have a wonderful resource for you in the room right now. I'll introduce you to my lead artist on the Latino Virtual Museum, Ms. Stacy Fox. She's in here, and she also teaches animation and gaming. So I'm sure that Stacy can provide some feedback. She's on text. Stacy, can you use voice, or you're comfortable with text?
Hi, Jean. How's it going?
It's going well.
Great. Yeah.
I keep muting myself out, so there's no static.
Me too.
Yeah. So some of the thing that I find that works best for students to prepare them is that the technology itself changes so fast, and the platforms are going to continue to change. Is to teach the students how to be intuitive technology users, and to teach them just really basic skills as far as how to, imagine an environment. And something as simple as, I often tell students their most magical thing is a sketch pad and a pencil, because it doesn't, depending on what you have for software or what you have available as an environment, or whether it's today we're in Unreal, you could be in Unity, Wonderland, or anything. If you can map that idea out and communicate that idea, you can pretty much put it on any platform, regardless of how the technology changes. So to me, their biggest thing is learning how to use technology intuitively so they can switch between different softwares and things, but also their ability to communicate. They can communicate their ideas clearly. That takes precedent. You can be the best artist in the world, but if you can't communicate your ideas clearly, you're not going to get anywhere with it.
Thank you.
It's great advice. Thank you, Stacy.
If you wanted some specifics, Jane, and others who are interested in specific immersive education technologies that might be useful in that regard, I would recommend starting with Scratch. We have a new technology working group. In fact, several of the members who are involved with the library working group are involved with Scratch. It teaches any age range, whether you're starting young in elementary school or college. It teaches computational thinking in a more intuitive way than just sitting down learning how to program. That can be awfully helpful as well, and that's another technology working group. I think there are a few folks, not necessarily here today, but that are involved in the libraries and then now the LAM group, who are involved with that Scratch group as well. So that actually we found that the young learners especially find Scratch exciting because they get to express themselves. They don't realize they're learning how to program, and that sets their mind up for creative programming, but they don't feel like they're doing anything that's drudgery. They're actually enjoying themselves while learning conditionals, loops, variables, all the types of things that are necessary to really take full advantage of immersive environments. So in one respect, I think your question has to be asked again, do you want folks to be content creators in the sense of creating the three-dimensional content and the immersion experiences, or also programming them? And if it's programming, I would add to what Melissa's colleague has already said and say you might want to take a look at a computational programming tool like Scratch.
All right, yeah, right. My question was really geared towards the undergraduates I'm working with currently. And so, yeah, I mean, I think Scratch is a possibility, and certainly I'll look at using that as an introduction to our programming unit, because we are going to have a full semester of immersive programming for the full dome next year. So that would be really useful there. But, you know, as far as you know, providing, I'm trying to really provide these students with some skills. And of course, I really liked what you had to say earlier about, you know, making sure they communicate their ideas clearly, and, you know, storyboarding and teaching all those aspects are definitely a part of this production class for the full dome. But I guess, you know, what I was really looking for was more along the lines of, you know, are there within the next, you know, like year or two specific things like, you know, that I should be looking out for? Because, you know, I have to teach specific skills as well as these kind of more skills that are not so clear. Like, how do you communicate ideas clearly? You know, that's something that possibly half the class won't get.
Jane, that is a really good question. I mean, you hit on something that is something even in well, I mean, it's huge in terms of trying to get artists or curators, producers, all to come at the table, right, with their ideas. There has to be some sort of understanding and negotiation in terms of communication and being able to articulate your concepts, whether via storyboarding, whether you're storyboarding via PowerPoint. Last year, with one of my pilot sites here locally in Washington, D.C., part of how we taught that communication skill that is critical to anything that we're doing here, really, because that's the bottom line, we looked at character development. So through character development for our avatars in one of our games, so taking them through the process of storytelling, creating a character and telling the story, what is their background, their biography, getting them to go through that whole process and then being able to talk about that in a brainstorming, small group session amongst each other, just to see that excitement, that energy, that is developing their skill set for communication, as Stacy pointed out earlier. That is just key. I don't know if Stacy wants to add any more to that, but really adamant about that.
Yeah, Melissa's absolutely right. When you're sitting at a table with people from different genres and different areas, if you don't know how to communicate successfully or know at least a little bit of their vocabulary to understand their language, it makes for a really difficult and frustrating collaboration. One of the things that I've done in workshops with students in the past is, let's say I have 20 students that attend a workshop that I give. Theoretically, each student is given $10,000. And then each student has to present their game to the rest of us as investors, and they have to get their ideas across to us. And then by the end of the workshop, we decide whose game got the most money from the investors. And that way, not only are you getting them to learn to communicate effectively, you're also honing them on one of the big things that students don't have when they come out of school is entrepreneurial business skills. And that can be practiced, at least once a week, if not more, in classes. So if they learn how to present their storyboard, then you can also in classes, I've had students come in as clients or bring in real world clients into the studio and have them talk to the students, and the students have to be able to learn to communicate. Maybe the client doesn't like the landscape, or maybe the client, one of the things at the Smithsonian that we're really adamant about is avatar representation and the representation of culture. Melissa and I and with other people and the curators are often engaged in conversations about, skin tone, clothing, cultural representation and patterns in hats and things like that. So there's a lot you can do, but if you do something where the students present themselves to a client and work with a client, that's a really good way for those skills. And to also be able to present to the class to try to find investors, just theoretically, is another way to really get them going on the business edge, the business side of things.
Thanks. Can you hear me? I included another lesson that I use called dialogues, and every 2 weeks the students are paired up with a new fellow student, and they have to conduct a 30-minute off-campus dialogue session, and then they complete an assignment together the following session. So like the first 2 weeks, they have this 30-minute dialogue. They have to write in their blog about it, make a blog post, which I believe helps with their business skills. I also require them to, these are my undergraduate students, of course, require them to read academic papers on immersion and use correct citations. So I'm preparing them for their academic life as well. And we do have a lot of the students participated last semester in a digital storytelling class that was really focused on doing some of the things. And I think that we're really incorporating a lot of these techniques into our teaching already. And I really appreciate the ideas. I'm really looking for specifics and more the technology and not so much the teaching aspects, if that makes sense. Because it's hard to keep up with all the technology and everything that's going on. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's so many virtual worlds out there. There's so many different applications and programs and workflows. And really what I'm more interested in learning about and making sure that I cover are multiple different ways that people are using their workflows.
Jane,
does that make sense?
Pardon me, Jane, you might find also that if you take this question, specifically frame it to the LAM group, where a lot of members who aren't right here today can participate, I think it'll generate a lot of feedback. In fact, I just noticed that Dan walked in. He's one of the co-chairs of the Scratch group that I mentioned, and also a co-chair of the K-12 group, which does a lot of these technologies. So I'd say we'll try to keep our meeting pretty close to an hour here, but this is precisely the reason for the launch event, to start some of these conversations, and then we take them to our email list discussion. But there are a fair number of specific technologies in immersive education that different members in the group are already using that I think they'd be happy to share those details with the larger community. So you might even want to pair up with Dan after the meeting privately if you're still here. Let me, folks, I know we try to keep our launch meetings to about an hour. We'll probably spill over a bit today. We've got a lot of good conversation. I don't want to impede that at all, but I wonder if before we head back towards the charter, I wanted to give you a peek at the charter so we could also have that conversation by the email list. Were there other questions or conversation points that you wanted to engage in at the moment while we're all here? And then we'll take a quick look at the charter before moving on with the agenda. And if not, you can click right on the agenda link right now, or pardon me, the agenda poster behind Jerome. If you click on that, it should open a new browser window for you. That opens up early access to the Journal of Immersive Education. It gives you a fair number of points to consider. It's basically telling you, here are the things that are ready, here are the things that are early access, and in essence, what you'll get a sense for is what the journal is going to provide you with today, but mostly for our purposes, we want to look at the library and museums charter. So if we scroll on down, you can return to these, and as I mentioned, either Jerome or I will post it to the group for follow-up. But if you scroll all the way down, there is an Enter the JIED under Early Access Conditions. If you click on that, it will load, and we have, it sounds like a lot of people are hitting it at once, but it should load the splash screen where you see 4 tiles: feature articles, technical papers, technology working group, and technologies on the horizon. If you hover over TWGs, you'll see the libraries and museums working group link. Click on that. And here we have the charter. The charter is, as we mentioned earlier, it is ready for feedback from the group and enhancement. In particular, some areas that you'll see probably some enhancements would be in objectives and use cases in particular. So it's a fairly heavy bit of material, so we wouldn't go through it all today. It'd be almost impossible to get through it in the time that we have. But the intention here is to provide you with early access to the journal, and through that you have the latest rendition, which is a final draft of the Libraries and Museums Technology Working Group Charter, and then we'll use our email discussion for feedback, things that you might want to contribute, points that you might want to discuss on this. And in fact, if you come on down, you'll see some of the very first use cases. There's the Immersive Education Study Rooms under use cases that Jerome had mentioned, his original vision for immersive study rooms and study environments. And following that, you'll see the real and virtual watershed experiences. That's the Smithsonian project that Melissa mentioned that we worked on several years ago that is continuing. And there is room for additional use cases and examples as well. So I'd encourage everyone, probably not right now because it would be a little bit distracting if you try to absorb all this now, but as I mentioned, Jerome or I will post it to the email group as well, and then we can start to produce feedback and your thoughts on the charter, on what needs to be added or revised based on your collective feedback. And as you all take a peek at that, I'm going to switch the agenda to the next set. We're wrapping up on number 4, and at this point I would say anybody that has a question or a comment or wants to participate in the discussion, just feel free to turn on your mic and jump right in. I'm going to switch the agenda. We, for the most part, covered 1, 2, 3, and a bit of 4. I'm going to move over starting with 5 in just a moment, so if you're back in the virtual world, that will be reflected there in a moment as well. We have a couple of open microphones. Looks like Sadia, maybe you have your mic on. And let me roll around here and see who else might have theirs on.
Hi.
Hello.
Oh, great. It's working.
You've got it. Yeah, we have somebody that has an open mic that's getting a bit of feedback though. And Dan pasted into text chat for anybody that didn't get to the charter by way of clicking on the poster on the wall. Yeah, Jane makes a good point. Sadia, if you turn your mic off for a second. Okay, great. Okay, so that did it. Oh, nope. Sadia, your mic is still on, I'm afraid.
It's on. Oh, you want it muted?
Yes, please. Then we'll just make sure. Okay, so I think that was in fact causing some of the feedback. So generally what would happen is if you're, say, on a Macintosh with no earbuds or headset, what will happen is the audio will come out of your computer speaker and it will feed back into what's called an open microphone. It's the one built into the laptop, and that causes a bit of a feedback loop. So I think that may have been what was happening. That's pretty easily remedied with earbuds, iPhone or iPod earbuds or a headset. And I just want to double check before we move on. Was everybody able to open up that JIED early access link? I'm going to paste it in. Dan had pasted it into text chat. I'll paste it in as well. But it really is just for a sense of getting a feel for the charter that will pick up the conversation after the meeting. And I'm going to paste it in here as well. So it should be in text chat if you can grab it. And otherwise, you should be able to click on the agenda. But specifically, falling out of the charter, we have roles and activities. I would suggest that if you were to take a look at the objectives of the group and the criteria for success, you will see some natural roles start to emerge. Grant writers, for example. Those who have worked on grants before would feel comfortable working in collective grant applications that we're producing. Builders. Actually, this is a great question. May I just ask if you could text chat if you would consider yourself a builder? Have you constructed or created immersive environments of one sort or another, any type before? And that would be a builder role. And so you might want to organize around building. So as we start to see here, we have a pretty large group in the Library Museums group. Today there are about 130 members, and I think we have about 20 here. And it will probably be necessary to, as I said, once we get a fair amount of discussion volume going on the email group, it will probably be necessary to break into subgroups. Otherwise we'll start to have nervous breakdowns keeping up with all the email that's going to inevitably come through the group. But we can break into subgroups as we need. But I would suggest that just as a practical matter, as you review the charter and consider the charter, look at specifically the areas of the charter you say, that's a place I want to be involved with. That's where I can bring some skills or some experience and participate in. And then we break into subgroups in the LAM community based on that. Wednesdays, huh, Cecil? All right, we'll try and stay away from Wednesdays. And I would then say for roles as well, we've only put a couple up there, builders and content creators, grant writers. But as you go through the charter, you might even bring in, having nothing to do with the charter, you might say, here's an area in my experience as a librarian or working with museums, here's an area that I think I could participate in. Why don't we have a group tackling X, Y, or Z? So let's leave 5 open as well. I think that fits directly in with reviewing the charter, providing feedback on the email list about the charter, and then breaking into smaller subgroups that are effectively co-chaired by those folks who are organizing, self-organizing around the areas that they want to contribute in. Okay, take care, Nicole. And maybe with this, I'll back off the mic and turn it over to Jerome, who had also brought massive online or massive open online courses, the concept of that to LAM. So I'll turn it back to him for a moment. If Jerome, you'd like to start with item number 6 on the agenda.
Yes, I mentioned in the course of my introductory remarks the recent advent of massive open online, online open courses, and the lack of capacity for students to communicate with each other, and faculty and instructional assistants to communicate with students, except in the most primitive ways. They're emailing and text chatting, and I guess there's some chat rooms, and it strikes me that an immersive communication environment would be so far superior to what is currently available. So I think we have an opportunity here to develop facilities for MOOC communication, and perhaps even bring in some of the course management capabilities that are being used by way of bringing syllabus and readings and other course materials into the communication space. So I raise that as an opportunity and was interested in any comments or observations from the attendees.
Hi, this is Kay Novak, and we're actually doing a game-based learning MOOC. And what we've been doing so far with, well, we've taken them into Second Life, World of Warcraft, EVE Online. We've been taking our cues, quite honestly, from the gaming community, which uses multiple modalities. So we've been doing things like having a back channel in Second Life, having a Google Hangout being broadcast into Second Life, having a whole chat happening there amongst the people who are used to Second Life, then having also the chat running with Google Hangout, and then also alongside as it's being broadcast for YouTube. So for us, when we've been doing the MOOCs, we've been really going across multiple modalities, just like any kind of the research that you'll see on game immersion, and what gamers usually do, and what gamers have even said is more authentic, by having multiple modalities up and being able to flip from one to the next to the next. And for virtual worlds and immersive environments, that's what I see. I see training people to be able to handle more than just the text chat in the room, and maybe just getting on Google Hangout. But the more immersive that you see in the gaming community that is constantly communicating and sharing ideas and learning from each other.
So you see an opportunity for the development of specific communication spaces for MOOCs, because as you suggested, you're using multiple modalities. Would it be easier to have a medium dedicated to the kind of communication that students need, that would make available not only the person-to-person communication, but also access to research resources and learning resources?
Oh, extending that part, yeah, the part that Second Life was never really able to give us, certainly. But I wouldn't necessarily discount how this is happening how it's already happening these days. Maybe not in MOOCs, but looking at what a gaming community does. Because, like you just mentioned now, a community that's gaming called a guild might have they might be on VoIP at the same time, playing in a very rich graphic place, at the same time pulling up websites to look at things and do researches
and stuff like that. And I think that's a very interesting research point, whether everything needs to be contained, or are we now in a place where people want to be jumping from one to the other to the next. But you're absolutely right. Second Life doesn't do it. And I think that's a very good research question. And I'm not absolutely sure that containing it in one space does it either. Because it might be having a very, having the right immersive space that allows you to go out to other places.
Can I add something to what Kay just said? I think Kay's really onto something. Gamers are transmedia people. They're using whatever's possible, and the beauty of the fact that you can use multiple modalities is not every gamer situation is the same. They're not all on the same computers. They don't have the same internet capabilities. Some may be, using Vivox, while others are using other things. And so the beauty of it is they are grabbing from different places, and that also makes the individual user who perhaps is in a guild, if you have a knowledge of another blog, or if you're in Warcraft and a special cheat place, where you can go to that the others don't, it gives the individual a chance to show that they are important, that they have a sense of importance, that they can bring something that others can't, that's unique, because they know another venue or another resource that the others don't. So it's this transmedia multi-happening, and it'll continue to evolve. And I don't think there can be one ring to rule them all. I don't think that's possible, because everybody's situation is different, and there's so many varieties of how all that can be put together.
Any other thoughts on this? There's some active text chatting going on. Does anybody want to elaborate on their text notes?
It might be worth mentioning, Jerome, this goes back to the early prototypes that we created in the library group. And this is specifically on one of our charter items on the use case, is one of the things that is lacking currently in the MOOCs is the collaborative study space, in the sense that we understand them in the immersive community. The next stage of that work is actually to produce reusable, immersive study environments that can be quickly configured for any given subject matter, so that I don't have to be a bespoke style immersive educator, meaning I don't have to construct my my environment from scratch in order to provide a study space or a collaborative space for my learners. I take an existing off-the-shelf, freely available, as far as immersive education is concerned, freely available structure that I can populate with all the study materials and resources, so that then we can get together with our students, or students can get together on their own in an immersive environment and collaborate, study, and work together. I think even as a very concrete, specific step for LAM.TWG, I would vigorously support and also help to direct some of this energy toward exactly that. And in fact, we've identified, I see Auntie is here from the Real Extend group, we've identified at least one reusable environment called the Toy Environment, which is a beautiful space. It is open, and we've talked with some of the developers about using that, simply to take that space as a template, perhaps take one or two of the most popular MOOCs and fill them up with learning resources and study materials and make them freely available for these communities to start using. So I'd say at the very least, I think we can have an action item for the group to identify perhaps the top 2 or 3 most popular MMOCs, and then populate the learning spaces that we have with resources and just make them available to these communities, if for nothing more than to provide freely available immersive learning spaces. And then those same templates can be reused over and over for a variety of learning engagements. I think, and I just saw a bunch of comments coming through. The last one I caught was, can we deal with assessment? I absolutely think we need to. That's an area that I think the group is uniquely qualified to start dealing with, is assessing in these environments. I'll back off a bit and continue to record some of the comments as Melissa and Jerome proceed with the agenda, but I think that this is a very exciting area. I think it's fresh in terms of the application of immersion. There's almost nothing being done really in that space. It's very early stage, and there's a lot of, I think, possible scenarios that we can engage around to utilize immersive technologies in these spaces. And the study space is just one of many examples. I think it was Kay who mentioned the variety of ways that this can be approached is very exciting.
And if I can chime in just a bit here, picking up a little bit of the conversation going on in texting. Kay, can you elaborate a little bit? I just caught the tail end of it where you were talking about, this is going back to MOOCs. Were you saying there's a lack of, or a need for a sense of presence? I mean, I love that because that's exactly what our whole point going into Second Life.
What I was going to say is that most participants in MOOCs don't, and I'm talking Coursera, the X-MOOCs, don't have a sense of presence. And about the closest thing that they get is that they watch a video or they watch a Google Hangout of their instructor, and that's as far as the instructor presence goes. And as far as co-presence with their fellow students, it's about, basically text-based rooms, or about the extent of that. There's some face-to-face meetup groups, but we haven't seen it extending past that. The only one that might go past that is that Coursera is going to offer one on digital games this summer by a professor from Vanderbilt who'll be doing it on digital games and culture, and he's having them go into the Lord of the Rings video. But as far as presence and actually being there, they're not doing that yet. And Cecil makes a point about, I'm sorry if I'm going this, about the campfire one. The Digital Storytelling 106 did have them come into Minecraft and sit around a fire and tell their stories. As far as innovation, I'd have to get the definition of exactly what Cecil considers innovation, because it would depend on the game what the innovation is. There's some games that allow for allow you to modify the code so that innovation can be done that way, like World of Warcraft does, Minecraft does, and then there's also machinima. But some people would say the innovative problem solving, or the problem solving, would be the innovation also. So it all depends on that. But as far as presence, there's a difference in presence that we know from 3D immersive environments versus text-based, and most MOOCs are text-based.
Yeah, that's a great point. And Kay, I don't know if you remember us, or I'm sure you do, from our Dia de los Muertos festival in Second Life, and really that's one of the big things that we were challenged in terms of how do we create a presence, right? I mean, we're dealing with museum collections, the derivatives in digital. How do you create the context around that, as well as creating the space? And a platform like Second Life really allowed us to do that. So it's great that you're actually pointing out that aspect in MOOCs, and I'm just really interested to see how that carries forward in this working group.
I think if others have additional thoughts on how LAM.TWG can contribute to development or research in this area, please post to the mailing list. So, Aaron, we have reached 3 o'clock. Do you want to extend the meeting or bring it to a conclusion in some way?
Why don't we just take a quick poll? We tend folks to cap them at 1 hour, so it's a nice crisp hour, especially as people have busy work days. How about we go for another 10 minutes just to wrap up? Would everybody feel comfortable if we broke at 3:10 Eastern Time, and that'll give us enough time to close out the agenda items? And then we can do, which is really the purpose here, was to get to know you virtually. I always say see you, I'll see you in the virtual world, and I do, I see your avatars, but it is a great opportunity for us to hear one another's voice, have some ad hoc conversation, some spontaneous moments, and then move those conversations in bulk to the email discussion list, which is already very active. It's great to see that going. So why don't we do that? We've got another a little bit less than 10 minutes, so why don't we just track on down the agenda, and you'll see that right under massive open online courses, MOOCs as we've been calling them in most of this discussion, is agenda item 7, which is 3D printing and augmented reality. These are two areas in particular that I think are going to radically reform our concept of immersion over the next decade and have some significant impacts on society in general, outside of education, teaching, and training. How they relate to the library and museum experience, I think that we can all envision or have some experience perhaps with some of these, but these are fairly new ground, and they deserve I think some early attention. We'll be doing at IED 2013 in Boston, we'll be doing some 3D printing and augmented reality sessions, but in particular, in the context of libraries and museums, where does 3D printing fit in? Where does augmented reality fit in? There are, I think, some innovative use cases that we could add to our charter based on MOOCs, 3D printing, and augmented reality. So if you have experience in any of those spaces, or you can imagine the utilization of these in libraries or museums, I would encourage you to draft. You can take a look at the charter, draft a very simple, clean use case so that we can add these 3 topics, MOOCs, 3D printing, and augmented reality, to our use cases in the charter. With that in mind, I would say we're really on the back end now. We're on the action items coming out of this meeting. We've had a chance to get to know one another by voice and virtually, and we're going to move on back to our email discussion group. The way we typically would do this is we will generate some momentum and energy through that email discussion group, and then we will ad hoc have more face-to-face meetings. We consider these virtual face-to-face meetings, but we also have physical face-to-face meetings at summits. The next upcoming summit is the main one. It's the IED 2013 in Boston. So if you are planning on attending, we will have LAM sessions, Library and Museum sessions. I think, Jerome, this is maybe worth noting that we can now, I think, have almost a mini track inside of the larger IED 2013 specifically for library and museums activities. So if folks here or on the discussion email list who could not join us here today are interested in presenting what you're doing in libraries and museums in the space, but you haven't yet submitted a proposal, we can make a special time exemption. Most of the time slots for submitting proposals have passed, but because you're in a technology working group, and TWGs are one of the major ways in which work gets done in immersive education, if you wanted to present the work that you're doing but missed the deadlines, let me, Jerome, or Melissa know, and we can extend some of those deadlines for you so that the Library and Museums group has a good presence and participation at the summit. So with this in mind, I'd say with just a few minutes left before we start to wrap up, I would suggest that the key items, as we work through our agenda today, some of the key items for the discussion on the email list would be to review the charter and give us your feedback on the charter. Let's add some new use cases. In particular, I would love to see folks take on MOOCs, 3D printing, and augmented reality as use cases. One area in particular I think that would be real helpful is profiles and case studies. We have a lot of members. There are thousands of members in immersive education. We have about 130 or so right here in the LAM.TWG group. It would be wonderful if we could profile each member. Here's what I'm doing, here's the work I'm involved with, here's my activity, both as individual profiles but more formal case studies. So I think we can start to develop those and share those with larger immersive education community, not just in LAM. And so I'll send some bits out about that and how you can create your profile and also start a case study in the area that you're working on. There's the MOOC discussions that I'd love to move on over to the list. I think that that is just ripe for attention. I think the immersive study spaces that Jerome originally envisioned, on which the library working group was initially founded, is just perfect to take an existing three-dimensional virtual environment, use it as a template to customize for the top 2 or 3, say, MOOC courses, and open them up to the public to utilize. I mentioned that Antti from the Real Extend team is here, and they have some beautiful open structures that we might use as a starting point for that. So I'd suggest let's move that to the email discussion as well. And then in here, you're welcome to come back here at any time. It is used for active teaching, and so if you just let the teachers teach if you happen to come in when they're teaching. But this is a pretty large area with a lot of room to explore. And right behind us, we won't go into it now, but you're welcome to when we break. Right behind us is a portal that will take you to other areas, and we can dedicate one of those areas to the library museums group, where we can start to build out that area with our case studies, our profiles, links to resources, and so forth. So if you want, after this meeting or at some other point, to explore, I would suggest going through the portal and seeing some of the space, and then just report back to the group by the email list. Say, hey, I took a look over here, and I think we could build this area out for LAM alone. So I'd say we might seriously consider having part of this larger environment dedicated just to LAM, so that we have a showcase for what you folks are doing in this space and for the work that we're doing in this group. And then finally, this is something that really Melissa can speak to much better than I can. Cultural heritage and the role of digital curation. This is something that she's been actively involved with and is driving. In fact, we're talking at this point about an arts and culture summit dedicated to arts and culture, with cultural heritage and digital curation being a very key theme in that. Melissa, I'm not sure if you wanted to continue the conversation here verbally, or wrap that up, or move it to the email list as you see fit.
Actually, Arian, I'd probably like to continue that on the listserv or subgroup. But on that note, I just want to give a shout out and introduce one of my Smithsonian colleagues, Rick Ferrante, who is actually here today. And he is the Director of Digital Services and IT Archivist for the Smithsonian Institution at large. So, Rick, if you can give a little shout out.
Rick?
He's also...
Hopefully you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
We can.
So our exposure on the archive side to digital curation and preservation goes several years back, but is largely library and archive focused. And what we're seeing is that museums and other cultural heritage organizations are really beginning to feel a sense of urgency. And because our archives is the institutional memory of the Smithsonian, that means as the museums deal with this issue and figuring out how to do it, that the way that they're going about it and what they're creating in order to do that is something that we will eventually have to be able to capture and preserve and provide sustained access to. So that's my stake in this.
Thank you, Rick. Mark! Oh my goodness. Mark Haddon. Hi, Mark. Mark Haddon is the director of the Smithsonian Environmental Research Center. We worked with Mark, and we still do. Aaron, you remember Mark?
I sure do. I'm looking, he's in the cream-colored sweater directly in front of me. Hi, Mark.
Oh. Can you chime in on voice, Mark? We could talk a little bit about your experience working with us on Watershed. Okay, maybe his voice isn't working. But it's good to see you, Mark.
We'll make sure, Mark, I'm not sure if you're in on the email list, but we'll make sure post-meeting that you are so you can participate directly in those conversations as well. And I'd imagine that everybody here is on the email list, but if the concept of the LAM.TWG or the LAM.TWG email list is foreign to you, just let me know and we'll get you signed up so that you can participate in those conversations. And with that, I'll turn it over to Melissa and Jerome to conclude the meeting. I think that we've got a great initial momentum going, lots of good conversations. So I'd like to say thank you both to Jerome and to Melissa for spearheading this new expanded group. I'm very excited about it myself, and I'll be participating directly, and I'm looking forward to working with those of you I haven't had a chance with before, and those of you such as we see around the room here to continue working with you.
Thank you, Aaron, and thank you, Melissa, as well. And I would reinforce Rick's final comments about preservation. We didn't touch on that at all in the course of this meeting, and it's a critical topic for us to consider. Organizing, making accessible and preserving digital assets and real assets taken into the digital world. So I'm delighted with the liveliness of the discussion so far and the direction that we're going. And I thank Melissa especially for bringing this wonderful group together.
Aw, thank you, Jerome. Thank you, Aaron. I really appreciate both of you taking the initiative to expand this working group and allowing, my colleagues from the Smithsonian to participate here, to learn from everybody and to learn from the work that we've been doing as well. And the importance also, again, from the museum perspective and how all interrelated. So thank you, everybody, for joining us today and for being part of the group.
Wonderful. Thank you all. Feel free to stay and explore as you see fit, and we'll pick up the conversations on the email list. Have a good afternoon or evening or morning, depending on where you're coming in from.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Melissa, for the meeting.
Hi, how are you?